The massive space station called Harmony's Edge floated in the darkness between stars. It was bigger than most cities, with silver walls that gleamed under the light of distant suns. Inside its great halls, representatives from 12 different alien species gathered for their most important meeting of the year. Ambassador Zekathara slithered across the polished floor on his belly. His reptilian scales caught the light as he moved toward the center of the chamber. Behind him, his assistant carried a metal case filled with data tablets. The Saurid Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years, and Zekathara's people were used to being in charge. Across the room, the Hive Queen Zixara clicked her mandibles together in thought. Her insect body was covered in hard, black armor that reflected the chamber's lights like mirrors. 6 arms moved constantly as she sorted through reports from her scouts. The Crystarchs floated nearby, their crystal bodies glowing with soft blue light. They spoke without words, sending thoughts directly into each other's minds. The Galactic Council had kept peace between these species for over 1,000 years. Trade flowed freely between worlds, and wars were settled through words instead of weapons. But today, something was wrong. The representatives whispered among themselves, and fear filled the air like a bad smell. "We must discuss the missing colonies," Zekathara announced as he reached the speaker's platform. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. 3 of our mining settlements have gone silent. No communications, no supply ships, nothing. The other representatives leaned forward in their seats. Missing colonies were rare but not unknown. Pirates sometimes attacked remote outposts, and equipment failed in the harsh conditions of deep space. But 3 colonies disappearing at the same time was different. "Tell us what you found," said Elder Timel from his seat in the back row. The old archivist was one of the few beings who remembered the early days of the council. His white fur was thin with age, and his large eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Zekathara activated a hologram in the center of the chamber. It showed a star map with 3 red dots marking the missing colonies. "Our investigation teams found the automated distress beacons floating in space, but the beacons were empty. No data, no recordings, nothing. It was as if someone had wiped them clean." Hive Queen Zixara's compound eyes focused on the display. "My scouts reported similar findings in the outer rim. Ships have been disappearing for months. We thought it was equipment failure or maybe rogue artificial intelligence systems. Or pirates," added Captain Vorthak of the Stellar Federation. His blue skin glowed faintly as he spoke. "There have always been criminals in the outer territories." The debate continued for hours. Each species had theories about what might be happening. Some blamed mechanical failures. Others suspected secret weapons testing by rival governments. A few suggested that unknown aliens from outside the galaxy might be invading. But Elder Timel sat quietly through all the arguments. He was thinking about something else, something that made his old heart beat faster. When the others finally stopped talking, he stood up slowly and walked to the center of the chamber. "I have been studying the archive records," he said in his quiet voice. "These disappearances follow a pattern. They match something that happened long ago." The representatives turned to look at him. Timel was known for his vast knowledge of galactic history. If he had found something important, they needed to hear it. "There was another species in the early days of the Council," Timel continued. "They called themselves humans. They came from a small yellow star near the galaxy's edge. The records say they were eager to join our community and share knowledge with other worlds." Zekathara's eyes narrowed. "I have never heard of these humans. Are you certain they existed?" Timel activated his own datapad, and new images appeared in the hologram. They showed bipedal creatures with pale skin and strange fur on their heads. They walked upright on 2 legs and had only 2 arms each. Compared to the other council species, they looked weak and primitive. "The humans made contact with us 800 years ago," Timel explained. "At first, everything went well. They were curious about our technology and shared their own scientific discoveries. But then something terrible happened. The chamber fell silent. Even the Crystarchs stopped their mental conversations to listen. There was an incident at one of our research stations," Timel continued. "A Saurid facility was completely destroyed. Thousands died, The evidence pointed to human involvement, though the details were never clear. The council decided that humans were too dangerous to remain in our community. "What happened to them?" asked Hive Queen Zixara. "They were exiled," Timel said sadly. "The council built a quarantine barrier around their home system. No ships were allowed in or out. The humans were cut off from the rest of the galaxy." Captain Vorthak laughed harshly. "If they were so dangerous, why should we worry about them now? That was 800 years ago. Even if they survived, they would still be primitive compared to our modern technology." But Timel's expression was grave. "That is what concerns me. The quarantine beacons around the human system went silent 50 years ago. No one bothered to investigate because we had all forgotten about them. But what if they found a way out? What if they have been growing stronger all this time?" The other representatives exchanged glances. The idea seemed impossible. How could a single species trapped in one star system for 8 centuries become a threat to the entire Galactic Council? "You worry too much, old friend," Zekathara said, dismissively. "The humans barely had faster-than-light travel when we exiled them. Even with 800 years of development, they could not match our combined fleets. Besides," added Hive Queen Zixara, "if they were responsible for the missing colonies, we would have detected their ships. Our sensor networks cover every hyperspace route in this part of the galaxy." Timel looked around the chamber one more time. He could see that the others had already made up their minds. They would not listen to warnings about an extinct species from their distant past. "Perhaps you are right," he said quietly. "Perhaps I am just an old fool seeing dangers that do not exist." But as the council session ended and the representatives prepared to return to their home worlds, Timel remained in the empty chamber. He stared at the hologram showing the missing colonies and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. Something was moving in the darkness between the stars. Something that had been waiting patiently for 800 years. And now it was finally ready to show the galaxy what humanity had become during their long exile. The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Council would send a joint task force to investigate the missing colonies. 47 of their best ships would travel to the Outer Rim and discover the truth behind the disappearances. None of them realized they were about to meet their worst nightmare. As the great station Harmony's Edge continued its endless orbit, automated systems recorded the decision in the official archives. But deep in the station's databanks, old files about a species called humans remained locked and forgotten, gathering digital dust like memories of a bad dream. The galaxy was about to remember why it had been so afraid of humanity in the first place. Admiral Korvash stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the massive viewing screen. The sordid dreadnought Sovereign's will was the pride of his fleet, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached in battle. Around him, 46 other ships moved through hyperspace like a pack of hunting predators. The Joint Task Force represented the best that the Galactic Council had to offer. Sordid heavy cruisers flew alongside Crystarch science vessels. Insectoid fighters buzzed around massive Federation battleships. Each species had contributed their finest ships and most experienced crews. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Vexai from her sensor station. The Crystarch officer's crystal body pulsed with blue light as she processed incoming data. "We are approaching the coordinates of the last missing colony." Korvash nodded his massive reptilian head. "All ships prepare to drop out of hyperspace, battle stations." The stars stretched and snapped back to normal as the fleet returned to regular space. What they found waiting for them made even the veteran admiral take a step backward. Debris filled the space around them as far as their sensors could reach. Twisted metal fragments floated in the darkness like the bones of some enormous beast. Hull plating drifted past their ships, some pieces still glowing with residual heat from whatever had destroyed them. "By the ancient gods," whispered Captain Zexra from the communication station. "What happened here?" Vexai's crystals flashed brighter as she analyzed the wreckage. "Admiral, I am reading debris from not just the missing colonies, but dozens of ships. Many of these fragments appear to be centuries old." "Centuries?" Korvash moved closer to examine her readings. That cannot be correct. I am afraid it is. Sir, some of these ships date back to the early Council period. There are fragments here from vessels that were reported lost over the past 800 years. The bridge fell silent. Every officer stared at the readings on their screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. The debris field was enormous, spanning several light minutes in every direction. It was like a graveyard of ships from across galactic history. Begin detailed scans, Korvash ordered. I want to know what destroyed these vessels. The task force spread out through the debris field, their sensors working overtime to catalog the wreckage. Each new discovery was more disturbing than the last. The destroyed ships came from every major species in the Council, but they had not been fighting each other. Admiral, Vexai reported after an hour of analysis. The destruction patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The hull damage shows signs of directed energy weapons, but the signatures do not match any known Council technology. Pirates with stolen weapons? Suggested Captain Jexra. No, sir. The attack patterns indicate precise tactical knowledge. Whoever did this knew exactly where to hit each ship to disable it most efficiently. They struck at power cores, weapon systems, and life support with surgical precision. Korvash studied the tactical displays. The evidence painted a picture that made no sense. A single unknown enemy had somehow destroyed dozens of ships over hundreds of years, collecting their victims in this massive graveyard. But how was that possible? Admiral, called the communications officer. Priority transmission from Council Command. The image of Elder Tymel appeared on the main screen. The old archivist looked even more worried than he had during the Council session. Admiral Korvash, you must return to Council space immediately. 3 more systems have reported missing ships. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures moving through hyperspace. What kind of energy signatures? Korvash asked. Unknown, Admiral. The patterns do not match any registered vessel in our databases. Whatever is out there, it is big and moving fast. Before Korvash could respond, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. Lieutenant Commander Vexai's crystals flashed urgent red as her sensors detected something new. Admiral, contact bearing 27 Mark IV. Distance, 1 million kilometers, and closing fast. On the viewing screen, a single point of light grew larger as it approached their position. At first, it looked like any other ship traveling through normal space. But as it came closer, the task force officers realized they were looking at something impossible. The approaching vessel was enormous, easily 3 times the size of their largest dreadnought. Its hull was dark and angular, covered with what appeared to be flowing armor that shifted and changed like liquid metal. No energy readings, no communication signals, no detectable life signs. It moved through space with deadly silence. All ships, battle stations, Korvash commanded. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. The alien ship continued its approach without responding. It moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large, gliding through space like a predator, stalking its prey. Admiral, it just dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of us, Vexai reported with wonder in her voice. I have never seen anything move like that. The dark ship positioned itself between the task force and the edge of the debris field. For long minutes, neither side moved. The Council ships held their weapons ready while the unknown vessel simply waited in silence. Then finally, a transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice was clear and cold, speaking in perfect galactic standard language. This is the UNSC Retribution. You are trespassing in human-controlled space. Every bridge in the task force fell completely silent. The name hit them like a physical blow. Human. The species that Elder Tymel had warned them about. The species that had been exiled 800 years ago. You have 30 seconds to reverse course, the voice continued with deadly calm. Or, be destroyed. Admiral Korvash found his voice first. This is Admiral Korvash of the Galactic Council Fleet. We are on a peaceful mission to investigate missing colonies. We mean no harm to anyone. 20 seconds, came the reply. Korvash looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. Fear was beginning to replace shock as they realized what they were facing. The humans were not extinct. They had been out here in the darkness all along, growing stronger while the council forgot they existed. Please, we only want to understand. What happened here? Korvash tried again. We can discuss this peacefully. 10 seconds. The Admiral's military training took over. All ships prepare evasive maneuvers. Ready weapons but do not fire unless fired upon. 5 seconds. The countdown reached 0, and the human ship acted, not with words or warnings, but with a display of power that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. A small craft launched from the Retribution's hull. At first, it looked like an ordinary fighter, no bigger than the interceptors carried by council ships. But as soon as it began moving, everyone realized they were watching something that defied every law of physics they knew. The human fighter accelerated to near light speed in an instant, with no visible reaction drive and no inertial dampeners. It moved through space like it was swimming through water, changing direction at impossible angles without slowing down. In less than a minute, the single small craft had positioned itself directly above the Admiral's flagship. Weapon systems that the Council's finest scientists could not identify locked onto the Sovereign's will with targeting precision that their computers called impossible. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the UNSC Retribution," came a new voice over the communication system. "Admiral, you and your fleet are going to learn what happens when you disturb a human graveyard." The lesson was about to begin, and the Galactic Council was about to discover that their worst nightmare had been waiting patiently in the darkness for 800 years. Admiral Korvash stared at the small human fighter floating above his massive dreadnought. The tiny craft looked harmless compared to the Sovereign's will, but every instinct the Admiral had developed over decades of warfare told him he was looking at death itself. "Captain Vasquez," he said carefully into his communicator, "I am Admiral Korvash of the Saurid Empire. We are here under the authority of the Galactic Council to investigate missing colonies. We have no hostile intentions." The human fighter remained motionless for several seconds. Then Captain Vasquez's voice came through the speakers again, cold and emotionless. "The Galactic Council, the same organization that declared my species too dangerous to exist among civilized beings. The same council that built a prison around our home and left us to die in isolation. That was 800 years ago," Korvash protested. "None of us were alive then. We are not responsible for what happened to your people." "No," Vasquez replied, "but you are responsible for what happens next." The human fighter moved so fast that the Admiral's eyes could not follow it. One moment it was floating peacefully above his ship, and the next it was already past them, circling the entire task force like a shark around a school of fish. "All ships track that fighter," Korvash commanded. "Lock weapons." But Lieutenant Commander Vexai shook her crystal head in amazement. "Admiral, our targeting computers cannot keep up with its movements. It is changing direction faster than our sensors can process." The human craft completed its circle and returned to hover directly in front of the flagship's bridge. Through the viewing screen, the council officers could see weapon ports opening along the fighter's hull. The weapons themselves were like nothing in their databases. "Admiral," Vexai whispered, "I am reading energy levels that should not be possible from a craft that size." Before Korvash could respond, the human fighter opened fire. The first blast struck the Sovereign's will's primary shield generator. The shields that had protected the dreadnought through 100 battles flickered and died like a candle in the wind. The second blast melted through 2 meters of armor plating as if it were paper. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as systems failed one after another. The human weapons were not trying to destroy them, Korvash realized with growing horror. They were surgically disabling specific systems, leaving the crew alive, but helpless. "Return fire," he ordered desperately. The dreadnought's massive weapon battery swiveled toward the human fighter and unleashed enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The energy beams that could crack planets struck the tiny craft dead center. The human fighter absorbed the attack without even slowing down. Its hull glowed briefly as it somehow redirected the energy harmlessly into space. "Impossible," breathed Captain Jexra from the communications station. "Nothing that small could survive. Our main guns." The human fighter continued its precise dismantling of the flagship. Engine systems failed. Weapons went offline. Life support flickered as backup power systems were methodically destroyed. In less than 3 minutes, the mightiest ship in the Saurid fleet was reduced to a floating hulk. The other ships in the task force tried to help, but the human fighter was already among them. It moved through the fleet like a ghost, striking each vessel with the same surgical precision. Shields fell, weapons died, engines shut down. Ship after ship found themselves crippled and defenseless. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The human fighter returned to its position above the flagship and simply waited. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez," came the voice over all communication channels. "I am broadcasting this message to every ship in your fleet and directly to the Galactic Council chambers." The main viewing screen activated, showing the image of a human female. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair and scars on her face that spoke of countless battles. But it was her eyes that held the Admiral's attention. They were cold and hard, like chips of ice. 800 years ago, Captain Vasquez began, your council branded my species as monsters and condemned us to isolation. You told the galaxy that we were too dangerous to exist among civilized worlds. Today, I want to thank you for that decision. Confused murmurs rippled across the bridge. What did she mean? For the first 2 centuries of our exile, we tried to prove that we deserved another chance. We sent peaceful messages to Council space. We shared our scientific discoveries and cultural achievements. We begged to be allowed back into galactic society. Vasquez paused, and her expression grew darker. Every message was destroyed before it could reach Council worlds. Every envoy ship was fired upon and driven away. Every attempt at peaceful contact was met with violence. By the 3rd century, we realized the truth. The Galactic Council would never accept us no matter what we did. Admiral Korvash felt a chill run down his spine. Where was this leading? So, we stopped trying to prove we were not monsters, Vasquez continued. Instead, we decided to become exactly what you feared we were. The image on the screen expanded to show more of the human ship's bridge. Korvash could see other humans working at stations filled with technology that looked centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed. The design was sleek and efficient, built for war. We spent 5 centuries exploring the dark spaces between the galactic arms, places where your people would never venture. We found resources and worlds that you never knew existed. We developed technologies that make your science look like children playing with toys. She gestured to someone off-screen, and new images appeared showing vast shipyards hidden in the darkness between stars. Thousands of ships like the Retribution floated in formation, their dark hulls absorbing light like holes in space. We learned to build ships that can repair themselves. We created weapons that manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. We developed artificial intelligence systems that make each of our vessels more dangerous than your entire fleets combined. Captain, Vasquez leaned forward and her voice became deadly quiet. But most importantly, we learned patience. We have been watching you for decades, studying your weaknesses, monitoring your communications. The colonies that have been disappearing were not random targets, Admiral. They were test sites where we evaluated your military capabilities. The truth hit Korvash like a physical blow. The missing colonies, the debris field, the centuries of lost ships. It had all been humanity preparing for this moment. You exiled us because you thought we were dangerous, Vasquez said. You were right, but you made one mistake. You let us live long enough to become everything you feared and more. She stood up from her command chair, and the camera followed. Her movement. I am giving you a choice, Admiral Korvash. You and your fleet can return to Council space with a message. Tell them that the children they abandoned have grown up. Tell them that humanity has become something they cannot imagine in their worst nightmares. The image zoomed in on her scarred face. Or you can stay here and join the graveyard that surrounds you. The choice is yours, but I will not make this offer again. The communication ended, leaving the Council fleet floating helplessly in the darkness. Around them, the debris of 800 years of victims drifted through space like a monument to humanity's patience. Admiral Korvash looked at his disabled ship and his frightened crew. The choice was no choice at all. Signal all ships, he said quietly. We are returning to Council space immediately. As the crippled fleet began its long journey home, none of them noticed the hundreds of other human ships that had been watching, from the shadows, invisible to their sensors. The trap had been perfect, and the message was clear. Humanity was no longer the weak species that had been exiled 8 centuries ago. They had become something far worse than the Council's worst fears, and they were just getting started. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began before Admiral Korvash's damaged fleet had even reached the outer border of Council space. Representatives from all 12 species gathered in the great chamber aboard Harmony's Edge, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Elder Timel sat in his usual place in the back row, but this time nobody was ignoring the old archivist. His warnings about the humans had proven terrifyingly accurate, and now everyone wanted to hear what else he might know. The reports cannot be accurate, insisted Ambassador Zekthara as he slithered across the chamber floor. One small fighter cannot disable an entire fleet. It is impossible. But the evidence was streaming in from multiple sources. Every ship in the task force told the same story. A single human craft had methodically crippled 47 of the Council's finest vessels, without taking a single hit in return. Hive Queen Zixara's compound eyes focused on the tactical displays floating above the chamber. The weapon signatures do not match anything in our databases. How could they develop such technology in isolation? Perhaps they were not as isolated as we believed, suggested Captain Vorthak of the Stellar Federation. His blue skin had turned pale with worry. If they have been expanding beyond their quarantine zone for centuries, he did not need to finish the thought. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications. If humanity had been secretly colonizing the dark spaces between stars for hundreds of years, they could have grown into something vast and powerful while the Council remained completely unaware. But the most disturbing reports were still coming. In long-range sensors across Council space were detecting strange contacts at the edges of known territory. Ships that appeared for brief moments before vanishing again, as if they were testing the boundaries of Council defenses. They are watching us, whispered Elder Timel. Just as Captain Vasquez said, they have been studying our weaknesses for decades. The Crystarch representative, Elder Zixhai, floated forward with his crystal body pulsing urgent colors. His species possessed the most advanced computers in the galaxy, and he had been running calculations since the first reports arrived. I have attempted to model their technological capabilities based on their observed development rate, he announced. My quantum computers began overheating after the first few calculations. What did you find? Asked Zekthara impatiently. If the humans maintained their pre-exile rate of innovation and had access to the resources of the dark matter regions, they should possess technology equivalent to... Zixhai paused, his crystals flickering with uncertainty. Equivalent to what? Pressed the ambassador. Equivalent to the precursors. The chamber fell completely silent. The precursors were the legendary race that had supposedly created the hyperspace, lanes millions of years ago before vanishing without a trace. Most council members believed they were merely a myth. That is impossible, Zekthara said finally. No single species could advance so far so quickly. Under normal circumstances, I would agree, Zixhai replied, but isolation and necessity can accelerate development in unexpected ways. When a species faces extinction, evolution takes dramatic leaps. As if summoned by their fears, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The communications officer, a young Saurid named Kextal, looked up from his console with terror in his eyes. Council members, we are receiving a transmission from the edge of Council space. It is from the humans. Put it through, ordered Elder Timel. The main hologram activated, showing the same scarred face that had spoken to Admiral Korvash's fleet. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her dark ship, surrounded by technology that seemed to bend reality around it. Greetings, members of the Galactic Council, she said with cold politeness. I trust Admiral Korvash delivered my message about our return. Zekthara rose to his full height, trying to project authority despite the fear in his voice. Captain Vasquez, I am Ambassador Zekthara of the Saurid Empire. We are prepared to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence. Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Peaceful coexistence? How interesting. That is exactly what my ancestors wanted 800 years ago. The past cannot be changed, the ambassador replied. But we can work together to build a better future. Can we? Vasquez asked. Let me show you something that might help you understand our position. The hologram expanded to show the space around the human ship. But the Retribution was no longer alone. Hundreds of other vessels hung in the darkness around it, their angular hulls absorbing light like holes in reality. Each ship was massive, bristling with weapons that the Council's science could not begin to understand. This is just one small part of our fleet, Vasquez explained casually. We have thousands of ships scattered throughout the galaxy, all of them invisible to your sensors until we choose to reveal them. The Council representatives stared in horror at the display. If this was just a small part of the human fleet, how many ships did they actually possess? What do you want from us? Asked Hive Queen Zixara, her voice barely above a whisper. Want? Vasquez seemed genuinely amused by the question. We do not want anything from you. We have moved beyond the need for anything your civilization can provide. She gestured to someone off screen, and the view changed to show more of the human fleet. But these ships were not positioned for attack. They were arranged in a perfect sphere around Council space, like a cage made of dark metal and impossible technology. We have surrounded your entire civilization, Vasquez announced. Every major trade route, every hyperspace lane, every colonial outpost. You are completely enclosed within a sphere of human ships. Elder Timel leaned forward in his chair. If you do not want to conquer us, then why are you doing this? Because, Vasquez replied, we want you to understand what it feels like to be trapped. For 800 years, you kept us imprisoned in our own system. Now it is your turn to experience isolation. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Even as Vasquez spoke, reports flooded in from across Council space. Merchant ships were refusing to travel. Colonial governments were demanding protection that the military could not provide. Stock markets crashed as panic spread through the galactic economy. This is not conquest, Vasquez continued. This is education. You are going to learn what happens when fear rules policy. You are going to discover how quickly civilization crumbles when cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Ambassador Zixara tried one last desperate argument. Captain, surely there must be some way to resolve this peacefully. What would it take to end this siege? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of the Council representatives. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but no less dangerous. There is one thing you could do, she said. You could acknowledge what you did to us. You could admit that exiling an entire species based on fear and prejudice was wrong. You could apologize. And if we do, asked Elder Timel, then we will leave, Vasquez replied simply. We will take our ships and our technology beyond the galactic rim, and you will never see us again. But the apology must be genuine, and it must come with guarantees that no other species will ever face what we endured. The communication ended, leaving the Council chamber in stunned silence. Outside the station's windows, the first signs of collapse were already visible. Ships that should have been carrying trade goods between worlds were turning back toward their home ports. The great machine of galactic civilization was grinding to a halt. She is right, Elder Timel said finally. We did this to ourselves. We created this nightmare through our own fear and prejudice. You would have us apologize to these monsters? Zixara demanded. No, Timel replied sadly. I would have us apologize to the people we turned into monsters. The debate that followed would determine the fate of galactic civilization, but outside in the darkness, humanity waited with the patience they had learned during 8 centuries of exile. They had surrounded an entire galaxy and brought it to its knees without firing a single shot. Now they would see if their former captors had learned anything from the experience of being trapped themselves. 3 months had passed since the human fleet had surrounded Council space, and galactic civilization was dying from within. No shots had been fired, no planets had been invaded, but the effect was worse than any war. Trade between worlds had stopped completely. Merchant ships sat idle in their ports rather than risk encountering human vessels in the darkness between stars. Food shortages appeared on worlds that had imported supplies for centuries. Colonial governments declared independence from the Council as panic spread through the population. The Saurid Empire, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, was fracturing as individual systems broke away to protect themselves. The Christarch Collective had withdrawn all their ships to defend their homeworlds. Even the mighty Stellar Federation was pulling back their forces, abandoning their outer colonies. Elder Tymel stood alone in the great chamber of Harmony's Edge, staring out at the stars through the massive viewing windows. The station that had once been the symbol of galactic unity was now nearly empty. Most of the council representatives had returned to their home worlds, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain basic functions. "The communication systems are ready," announced Captain Vorthak from behind him. The blue-skinned officer looked exhausted after months of trying to hold the council together. "Captain Vasquez has agreed to meet with us." Tymel nodded slowly. The debate had raged for weeks, tearing the council apart from the inside. Some species, led by Ambassador Zekthera, refused to apologize to what they still called an inferior race. Others, seeing their civilization crumbling around them, begged for any solution that would end the crisis. The hologram activated, showing Captain Vasquez standing in the same chamber where humanity had been exiled 8 centuries ago. She wore a simple black uniform with no decorations or symbols of rank. Her scarred face was calm as she looked around the mostly empty room. "So few of you came," she observed. "I suppose the others are too proud to face the consequences of their ancestors' actions. Many of them are dealing with revolts on their home worlds," Tymel replied honestly. "Fear has made people do desperate things." "Fear," Vasquez repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I imagine they are learning what that feels like. My people lived with that fear for 800 years. She walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. "Do you know what the real tragedy is, Elder Tymel? The original incident that led to our exile was not even our fault." The old archivist's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Vasquez smiled sadly. "My people have excellent record-keeping abilities. We never forgot what really happened at that Saurid research station. Your scientists were experimenting with stellar manipulation, trying to extract energy directly from stars. They ignored our warnings that their target star was unstable." "Warnings?" Tymel felt his heart skip a beat. "Oh yes. Our ships detected the stellar instability weeks before the explosion. We sent multiple messages to the research station, begging them to evacuate. When they ignored us, we sent a rescue mission to get the scientists out before the star went supernova." The horrible truth was beginning to dawn on the old archivist. "You were trying to save them." "We managed to evacuate about half the station's personnel before the star exploded. The shockwave destroyed our rescue ships and most of the remaining station. When the council investigators arrived, they saw human wreckage mixed with Saurid debris and jumped to the obvious conclusion." Vasquez's expression hardened. "We tried to explain what really happened. We provided sensor logs, communication records, survivor testimony. But the council had already made up their minds. They needed someone to blame for the disaster, and we were convenient outsiders." Tymel felt sick. "We exiled you for trying to help us." "You exiled us because you were afraid of us," Vasquez corrected. "The rescue attempt was just an excuse. Your people had been looking for reasons to exclude humanity from the galactic community from the moment we made first contact." The communication chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Outside, the lights of distant ships could be seen moving through space, but they were all heading away from Council territory. "What do you really want from us?" Tymel asked finally. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, studying the empty seats where the other Council representatives should have been sitting. "I want you to learn," she said eventually. "I want your people to understand that fear and prejudice have consequences, that when you cast someone out because they are different, you create your own enemies." She turned to face the few remaining council members directly. "But more than that, I want you to make sure this never happens again. I want laws that prevent any species from being exiled based on fear alone. I want guarantees that future generations will not repeat your mistakes. And if we agree to these terms? Asked Captain Vorthak. Then we will leave. Vasquez replied simply. My people have grown beyond the need for revenge. We have technologies and territories that your civilization cannot even imagine. We are ready to explore other galaxies, other dimensions of reality that are beyond your current science. She paused, her expression softening slightly. We forgive you for what you did to us. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying hatred for 800 years has taught us that forgiveness is the only path to true freedom. Elder Timel felt tears running down his old face. You would really leave? After all we put you through? Elder Timel, Vasquez said gently, the greatest victory is not conquering your enemies. It is growing beyond the need for conquest at all. My people have learned that lesson. Now it is time for yours to learn it as well. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone had expected. The Saurid Empire, led by Ambassador Zekathara, voted against the apology until the very end. But as reports came in of more systems declaring independence, even the proud reptilian species realized they had no choice. The formal apology was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Elder Timel himself read the statement, acknowledging that the exile of humanity had been based on fear and prejudice rather than justice. He promised that the Council would establish new laws to prevent such actions in the future. Captain Vasquez received the apology aboard her flagship, surrounded by the vast fleet that had brought an entire civilization to its knees without firing a shot. When the transmission ended, she turned to her bridge crew with a smile. Begin the withdrawal, she ordered. Set course for the galactic rim. One by one, the human ships disappeared from Council space. They faded back into the darkness between stars like ghosts returning to their graves. Within days, the siege was over, and normal space traffic began to resume. But the galaxy was forever changed. The Council implemented new protocols to protect minority species from discrimination. Trade agreements included provisions for peaceful contact with unknown civilizations. Fear-based policies were banned by constitutional amendment. The last message came from Captain Vasquez as her ship reached the edge of Council space. It was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every world in the galaxy would hear it. To the people of the Galactic Council, her voice carried across the stars, we leave you with this final thought. The species you feared most became your teachers in the end. We showed you that true strength comes not from weapons or technology, but from the wisdom to choose mercy when you have the power to choose vengeance. The transmission ended, and humanity vanished beyond the galactic rim. Some said they could still detect faint signals from deep space, evidence that the human civilization continued to grow and explore in dimensions that Council science could barely comprehend. Elder Timel lived for another 50 years after the crisis ended. He spent his remaining time documenting the true history of human contact, ensuring that future generations would know the real story behind the exile. His final report ended with a simple observation. We called them monsters because we were afraid of what we did not understand. In the end, they proved to be more human than we were. They chose to save us from ourselves when they could have destroyed us. May we never forget the price of fear, and may we never again let prejudice blind us to the truth. 100 years later, deep space monitoring stations would occasionally detect brief signals from beyond the galactic rim. The signals were complex and beautiful, like cosmic music drifting in from unimaginable distances. Most scientists believed they were natural phenomena, but a few suspected they were listening to the voices of humanity as it explored wonders that the Council could not even imagine. The nightmare that the Galactic Council had feared most had become their salvation. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, Captain Elena Vasquez smiled as her people continued their eternal journey among the stars, free at last from the small fears of those they had left behind.